Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Don't know why I decided to put the emphasis on roll, but I did. Maybe I'll just pick, Sap, one word out of our long title every time and put the emphasis on that just to screw with people so they can decide for themselves what the most important word is.
Yeah, because, the pick is important, right? You got to set the pick, but then you got to roll. Or in the case of Steph Curry, you don't need to do anything. He just launches 35-footers and hits them at 50%. So, yeah, I like that. So let's emphasize different words every time you bring us in. It
could be like Ohio State, the Pick and Roll NBA podcast, right? That's how all the players like to introduce Ohio State when they do the thing. The Ohio State University.
Absolutely. They sure do. They sure do. It's like the U, Miami of Florida Hurricanes. The U.
Yeah, except for, one of those programs has been, consistently good for the past 20 years, and one still thinks that they're a viable college football program, even though they haven't been good for 20 years.
They haven't been really since about the mid-2010s. So, it's been a while since they've been a relevant program. But, yeah, Ohio State dominates the Big Ten and then loses in the national semifinal, the national final.
That's the way of things. It's sort of like how we were talking the other day about how the Knicks, how there's no excuse they've been bad for so long. If you're a college football program in Miami, which has, South Florida has some of the best collection of high school athletes in the entire country, really no excuse to not be a perennial contender. I don't know what's happened there.
Yeah, you should be able to recruit. Again, Alabama goes in there and takes a lot of the 5-star recruits. You've got to deal with Florida.
Where would you rather live, though,
Florida
Sap?
State.
Miami or Tuscaloosa?
Well, the thing about Tuscaloosa is the greatest football coach in the history of college football lives there. His name is Nick Saban. So I think he's pretty appealing to go play for. He gets you ready for the NFL.
That's true. The guy who's not the greatest NBA coach in the world, pro transition, is Brad Stevens, who you've heard me multiple times on this show and on my Celtics postgame shows bash, though I think he's been doing a better job recently for the Celtics, even though their win streak just came to an end the other night against the Bulls. He got offered a mega deal, Sap, to go back to college, something that we were talking about at the time. The University of Indiana had an opening. The connection to Brad Stevens was clear. He grew up as an IU fan. He's from Indiana. Tremendous college coach with a lot of success, back-to-back national championship appearances with Butler, who doesn't have nearly the resources as IU. And so they offered him a reported 7-year, $70 million to come coach the Hoosiers, to which Brad Stevens said thanks, but no thanks, and remains the head coach of the Celtics. Does what surprises you more, Sap? The offer or the rejection of the offer?
I would say the offer surprises me because it's so huge. 7 years, $70 million, that's $10 million a year. And when you look at it, the only other two college coaches that are making that type of money are Mike Krzyzewski at Duke and John Calipari at Kentucky. Krzyzewski's the gold standard among college coaches. He's got 5 national championships. He's been there nearly 40 years. He's the Nick Saban of college basketball.
Right. Coaches Team USA.
He's the guy. And Calipari does a great job recruiting at Kentucky. Both of those guys are already in the Basketball Hall of Fame. So I was surprised that $10 million a year is right around what those guys make. Now, you can also incorporate sneaker deals and money that comes from boosters and all of that fun stuff. So I was surprised by that they were going to offer him that much. Now, it doesn't have to come directly from the university. It can come from boosters. Right. And they think that Brad Stevens would be able to recruit and make Indiana relevant again. I think a couple of weeks ago we talked about Stevens potentially going to Indiana, and I think you nailed it by saying that the Indiana Hoosiers are kind of like Nebraska football now. They're not really relevant anymore. You look at the Big Ten, it's Michigan, Michigan State. Those are the two schools that you think first. Wisconsin, State. Ohio State. Illinois had a great regular season this year.
No, they've fallen by the wayside. Indiana's completely fallen by the wayside, Seth.
Right. So obviously they made this offer figuring that Brad Stevens could do it. Now, Brad Stevens was wildly successful at Butler, and you've always maintained that he sometimes has trouble coaching stars. So if he's going to be recruiting the one-and-done guys at Indiana, would he have trouble with that as well? Is he better suited for a mid-major like Butler where he gets the most out of all of these players. Remember, Shaka Smart went to the Final Four
Right.
1 year with Virginia Commonwealth, I think it was.
VCU.
And VCU. Then he goes to Texas and was not successful at all. Now he's at Marquette. Some of these coaches can just take, good players and make them really good and build a system around them, and occasionally lightning strikes and they go to the Final Four rather than being this great recruiter. I don't think of Brad Stevens as that type of guy being a great recruiter. I mean, Krzyzewski has Duke, so that kind of sells its own. But Calipari seems to me to be a phenomenal recruiter, right? I mean, we've seen that at multiple
he's the
locations.
best. Yeah, best in the business.
Best recruiter. I still maintain, and I know you can't stand him, that Rick Pitino is the best coach, in-game coach in all of college basketball. But I think Stevens getting that offer, if it's true, turning it down, leads me to believe, what are the Celtics paying him? Like, before the season started, we heard that he got a 6-year extension. I'm guessing he's making $7-8 million a year, because that's what a lot of coaches are in the NBA. That's what they're making right now. Billy Donovan's making $7-8 million a year with the Bulls. He was a really good college coach, but hasn't really shown much in the pro game. So I think he's making somewhere around the $7-8 million range. So it's not a lot less than that offer from Indiana. And from everything we hear, it's easier to coach in the NBA than in college, because you're constantly recruiting in college. The one and dones, you just never stop recruiting. Whereas in the NBA, a general manager gives you talent and you go from there. Now, it is a coach's sport, college basketball, whereas obviously it's a player's sport in the NBA. So at some point, he's going to get let go by the Celtics, we think, at some point, unless he has a job for life, which, between he and Danny Ainge, it sometimes appears that's the case. So, and the person that I have to really feel bad for is Mike Woodson, who got 6 years, $21 million. That's $3.5 million a year, which is, do the math, 1/3.
It's less, yes.
1/3 of what Brad Stevens got offered. So Mike Woodson's like, damn, I'm getting 1/3 of what Brad Stevens was offered. I went to Indiana. And, oh, by the way, Mike Woodson was a pretty good coach in the NBA. The last time the Knicks won a playoff series, Mike Woodson was their head coach back in 2013 when they beat the Celtics in 6 games. It's the only playoff series the Knicks have won this century. So Mike Woodson's like, man, I'm a pretty good coach, and I'm getting $3.5 million a year, and you offered that guy $10 million a year? Interesting.
Yeah, Brad Stevens' initial contract with the Celtics was 6 years, $22 million. As you said, he just signed an extension after the bubble ended. The deals of that, the terms of that deal aren't out there. I'm not sure why. I guess the team doesn't have to disclose it. It doesn't count against your cap. You can pay the coach whatever the hell you want. But obviously, it must be a significant pay raise, I would think, from the 6 years, $22 million that he signed for initially. And like you said, to turn down what would be a $10 million a year offer from Indiana, where he would be going back home and presumably would also get, other things taken care of by boosters. I know, like you mentioned, Nick Saban, like his house is taken care of by the boosters. He doesn't pay real taxes on it or anything like that. He just has a house, like a mansion in Tuscaloosa that he pays nothing for. So you get nice benefits too. Yeah, it's a lot of money to turn down. And the speculation I would have, based off of him turning down that really lucrative contract offer, is, one, he doesn't want to go back to college because, as you mentioned, Sap, it is more of a pain in the ass. You have more responsibilities. It's nonstop recruiting. There's no off season. You're recruiting during the off season. Whereas basketball, you get at least a vacation. In the NBA. And two, he probably feels very secure in his job with the Celtics and doesn't think that they're going to let him go. That's my honestly big takeaway. And it surprises me, but it also disappoints me, Sap, because, I've been calling for his ouster for a while now. I think even despite their recent 6-game win streak, I think that this season's been an abject failure, and that the team has regressed, and he's had other failures in the playoffs. Even the fact that they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year in the bubble wasn't enough of an accomplishment because they lost to a lesser team and they couldn't figure out his own defense. And I feel like he was outcoached in that. So to have a sort of guarantee in the midst of what's been a bad season and a backdrop of, kind of disappointing finishes in the NBA playoffs the past few seasons, I'm surprised that he has so much confidence to turn down a big offer that he feels like he's going to remain with the Celtics. And I would speculate as to why the Celtics would say that to him, give him some sort of guarantee or promise at this point.
But it doesn't really even matter because the contract's guaranteed. They could fire him at the end of the season. They're going to then owe him 5 years at $7 million a year. So he's going to get paid that money. And then at that point, he can sit tight for a year or two, maybe go coach somewhere else in the NBA or go to college. And, you work all those deals out. Financially, he's secure. And I think there's less pressure on him coaching the Celtics than coaching at Indiana. Because at Indiana, that is a religion. Whereas here, the Celtics are one of 4 pro teams. And I think Celtics media is probably the softest on the team in comparison to the other sports. And, to be quite frank with you, I don't think anybody really covers any of the 4 major teams in Boston really that hard the way it was done before, other than Dan Shaughnessy, who I think does a great job as a columnist with the Boston Globe. There's not a lot of criticism around it.
Yeah, the Red Sox are covered the hardest, I'd say.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, even though they won 4 World Series championships, there's still, some negative stuff out there about them. I'm going to leave talk radio out of it, but I'm talking about...
that's not really covering the team, right?
It's not covering the team. In fact, it's encouraged not to cover the team. You don't want to be too close to the team when you're criticizing it every day. That's the beauty of talk radio. I mean, we don't have to go into TD Garden and, face any of the Celtics players or coaches. We can sit here in our, living room.
I just tweet at them.
Just tweet at them and, pontificate about what we would do differently. So there's less pressure here than would be at Indiana. In Bloomington, Indiana, you're the only game in town. I know one of your sisters went
my
to
youngest sister
Indiana,
went
right?
there.
So she can kind of explain to you what it's like there. Maybe it's not what it was in the 70s and 80s when Bobby Knight was there.
No, but the expectation's still there, Sap.
It's still big.
It's not... It's an unreasonable expectation, sort of, right? You have these banners. They're still selling. I've been to Bloomington a couple times to visit my sister when she was in college there. Every shop you go into, it's still, you can get the shirt, national champions, 1970, whatever. And, it's still a big deal. It's the definition of a basketball school. And
they won 3 national championships in my lifetime. I remember them all. 1976 was the last undefeated team. 81, Isaiah Thomas led them. In 87, they upset Syracuse in the national championship game. And Bobby Knight's one of the greatest coaches in the history of college basketball. But again, they haven't won a national championship since 1987. They really have been relevant. They've gone to a few Final Fours along the way, but they're not what they were.
Oh, the landscape's changed, Sep, since the late 80s. And that there's social media. There's different ways to recruit kids. Kids aren't as interested in playing in Bloomington, Indiana. If you're coming from Los Angeles, it's not as appealing. So the job to rebuild that IU program it's a big rebuild. It's a tear down and a rebuild. It's not it's not an on the fly thing. I think Brad Stevens is a good enough coach in the college level to be able to get them to a significantly better spot where they've been. But I don't think it would happen overnight. And but the expectation once you hire Brad Stevens is that the next year you're going to the Final Four, and that's just not a reasonable or realistic expectation.
No.
But like you said, Seth, that's the same expectation Nebraska football fans had when they hired Scott Frost, is that, okay, we're going to be competing for a national championship. Again, it's not the 90s or the 80s. Kids don't have to go to schools in the middle of nowhere if they don't want to anymore. There's a lot more accessibility. You have the ability to talk to coaches from all over the country now on Zoom, on Skype. You can, visits are much easier to get to. There's more flights to different places. There's college towns have airports now. So it's harder for a place that's in the middle of the country to be recruiting. The best recruits in the country come from in basketball or football, come from California, Texas, Ohio, Florida, those sorts of states. And it's tough to sell them on coming to Bloomington, Indiana, or Lincoln, Nebraska, when there's a lot of better geographic options for players now, and a lot more with the rise of these mid-major schools and college basketball. Sep, there's a lot more schools that you could go to and say, hey, I can actually make the tournament on this team and be the best player on this team. Like a Butler is now a legitimate school to go to if you're a high-ish level recruit, where you could say, if I go to Butler, I'm probably make the tournament at least 2 of my 4 years of eligibility.
I think Brad Stevens made the right choice here. He's going to make a lot of money with the Celtics. If they let him go at the end of the year, that contract is guaranteed. There's not as much pressure here as there would be in Indiana. And then if he moves on from here in a year or two, he can reinvent himself. He's still very young. He's only 45 years old. And
He'd get another
there will
NBA
be programs that want him. He could get another NBA job, or he could go coach in college, or do whatever he wants to do. He made plenty of money here. It's an interesting thing, and it's not a surprise that they offered him something. It's just the numbers are surprising because it actually supersedes Mike Krzyzewski and John Calipari, who are, by all counts, the two most successful coaches in college basketball right now.
Yeah, and it shows to you how desperate IU was to land Brad Stevens and how desperate they are to sort of remake that basketball program, because a lot of the school's money is tied to having a successful basketball program. So I think they looked at it as a wise investment. If they can get that program up and running and successful and churning out ticket sales and merchandise, they'll make that $70 million back, no problem. If the team is good. But it's a large amount. And I think Brad Stevens is weighing his options for the future and saying, the money I can make out somewhere else, and maybe it's not as much of a dream job as I thought it was for him, Sap.
No, sometimes you can never go home, and that could be the case with Brad Stevens.
Yeah, and in regards to his coaching future in the NBA, Sap, before we finish this topic up, whatever happens with him and the Celtics, it's not going to be where he flames out. The team is going to make the playoffs, so it's not going to be like a bottoming out where coaches get fired for their team, underperforming so bad that they're in the top 3 or 4 picks. So however it ends here, it's not going to end like some of the other coaches that get fired where it's just an abject disaster. The team just completely bottoms out. Their record's horrible. So that opens up the door for plenty of teams to say, hey, I want to bring in this guy. He never did a terrible job in Boston. It didn't end in flames. So when you end on that terms of this, okay, you can look at the Celtics, are expecting a championship. He didn't quite get them there, but he was pretty successful. They made the playoffs virtually every year he coached. They made the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of times. We feel pretty good about bringing this guy in. We can sell this to our fan base. He didn't burn a team down to the ground. So I think that he'll have his pick of plenty of teams that will want to hire him. I just think that it's run its course in Boston.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he's never going to embarrass the organization. And he has gone to 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals, which in Boston isn't much of an accomplishment when you get 17 banners hanging above you, or in the case with the pandemic, they've had him behind the basket.
Yes,
but in some places, that's pretty good, right? I mean, if he goes to the New Orleans Pelicans and drags them to the Western Conference Finals, that's a major accomplishment. So yeah, he's all set, and you won't have to worry about him making money after he leaves here, and he'll be getting all that guaranteed money if they move on from him.
Yeah, the bar is different for different teams. As you talked about before, the Knicks have won 1 playoff series since 1999.
Yep, last time that they went past the second round of the playoffs when they went to the NBA Finals and lost to San Antonio. Since that point, they've won 1 playoff series. That was against the Celtics in 2013. So,
right, and we talked about the Timberwolves the other day. They have new ownership, and they've only been to 1 Western Conference Finals. So the bar is extremely different. The Celtics, the Lakers have the highest bar, maybe in sports, Sap, that, the expectation. I'd throw in maybe the Packers and the Patriots with them too. Is that,
I'd say the Yankees even more so than everyone.
You know what? I forgot about the Yankees. That's a great point,
Yankees.
too.
The Yankees, the one. I mean,
it's
that's the gold
championship or
standard.
Bust.
Yeah, I mean, the Canadians in hockey and the Cowboys in football, but they really haven't been relevant in terms of winning for the last 25 years. But yeah, it's the Yankees. It's World Series or bust every year for the Yankees.
It's a similar sort of mentality, though, for the Celtics and the Lakers, realistic or not, though, right? If you get to the conference finals and lose, that's not something fans are happy about.
Not at all.
If you get to the conference finals and lose, if you're a Timberwolves fan, you're having a parade in the streets. So, it's a different bar, and it's hard coaching the Celtics with these expectations. I don't fault Brad Stevens for that. It is a very high bar to reach, but it's as a fan, Sap, it's my expectation that the Celtics are competing for championships, and he hasn't gotten them to that level. So in my view, I say, okay, bring in the next guy. Let's see how he does, or she. Maybe he'll be a female coach. I don't know.
Why not?
Other Celtics news, Sap, because we are based in Boston. We like to pay tribute to the greatest franchise in North American sports. The Celtics
We're not
brought
talking
in
about the Yankees, are we? We're going to continue on about the Yankees?
Yankees bought championships. So not fair.
Oh.
The Celtics signed former number 2 overall pick Jabari Parker towards the end of last week. He has since played in 2 games and looked relatively decent. He's played 3 games this year prior to joining the Celtics. He's been in and out from different teams with injuries. He's torn his ACL twice. This is a guy who came into the league with a lot of hype coming out of Duke. He was the top overall recruit. Him and Andrew Wiggins coming out of high school. It was sort of like take your pick. Either one of these guys is going to be a stud in the NBA. It hasn't worked out for Jabari Parker. But this is a fresh start for him now with the Celtics. Extremely low expectations. What can Jabari Parker bring for the Celtics?
Keep those expectations low. He's a disaster on the defensive end. He's a disaster on the defensive end. He really is. I mean, you love defense more than I do. He is completely lost on the defensive end of the floor. Offensively, he can do some things. Obviously, he's not been a durable player. That's kind of an understatement. This is his 7th year, his 6th different team. He's only played 290 games. He's missed more games than he's played in. He's had a lot of injuries. He seems indifferent about defense. I think he was asked about it some point in his career about defense. He goes, they pay me to score, not play defense. That's true. Not
that quote
really
hurt
what
him.
You want to hear. That would hurt him. But you know what? If he's your 9th guy and you catch lightning in a bottle, maybe he can help you to score off the bench, which they need. You know, God forbid he takes any minutes away from Grant Williams. You know, some Celtic Twitter
don't get me started.
Will go nuts. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what Grant Williams does, other than he's just there. It oftentimes feels like they're playing 4 against 5 when he's on the floor. But
he's the worst fast break player I've ever seen. This isn't hyperbole, Zep. He has killed so many Celtics fast breaks because he's slow, has bad hands, and makes poor decisions with the basketball.
He did that in that loss to the Bulls the other night where, he was in the middle of a 3-on-1 and he totally screwed it up. He laid it off to, I think it was Jaylen Brown, who was just gobbled up at that point, or it was Jason Tatum. Can't remember.
Yeah, no, it's terrible, but he does that once a game.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't really have any discernible skill, right? I mean, there's some guys Romeo Langford, not a big fan of his, but it appears he can play defense. He's long, fairly athletic, right? I mean, Neesmith is supposed to be a decent shooter. Maybe we'll see that at some point. You usually can have one skill where you say, okay, when he's on the court, he can help us in this manner. Other than maybe hitting a corner 3 occasionally, what does Grant Williams do? He's not really a good defender. He's not a versatile player. He's
Brad
just
Stevens'
there.
Teacher's pet.
He definitely is the teacher's pet. So maybe Jabari Parker, takes some minutes from Grant Williams, which may benefit them. And you never know. But he is scary on the defensive end. We can agree on that.
Yeah, no, he's not good defensively. Is there anything you like about his game, Sap?
He's a natural scorer. I mean, he can score from different levels. I thought when he was coming into the NBA, he was going to be somewhat like a Paul Pierce type player. He's not a real athletic-looking guy. He doesn't appear to be in the best of shape, but he has skills.
Yeah, he's had a couple loud dunks in the past 2 games.
Which surprised me, too. Yeah, and they can play him as a small 5 occasionally because that's where the league has gone. Yeah, he did. He had a really nice dunk against the Bulls the other night, which kind of made me jump out of my chair because I don't expect that from him. But the guy can put the ball in the basket, but it's just a matter of, can he get to the court? That's the most important thing because of all of these injuries. Look, if it doesn't work out, he's gone. It's not like you traded anything for him. It's not like you're giving him any big deal, although they did sign him through next year, which is kind of odd. We see a lot of 10-day contracts in the NBA.
I don't think it's guaranteed, though, next year.
Okay, that makes sense. So we'll see what happens with him. Again, they're just throwing spaghetti up against the wall and hoping some of it sticks, right? And
yeah, why not? The bench is so bad. It's so bad.
It really is. Terrible bench. And then when you have 4 players out, it's that much worse. So he's just kind of a guy who can maybe fill in the gaps here down the stretch and see what happens in the postseason.
I was talking to one of the people who watched my Celtics post-game show, shout out Leonard Kim, and he was making a good point, Sap. He was saying that the Celtics have went from being really sort of bench heavy, where their bench was the strength of the team, when they had, Isaiah Thomas, and they could go really deep and they were quality, to they're just now that's the opposite. They're so top heavy with Tatum and Brown, and their bench is giving you, they've like done a complete 180 in terms of how the team is built.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, you would rank the Celtics players 1 through 9, and you'd come up with a different list all the time. Like
Sure.
Isaiah Thomas was essentially their best player, but then you'd kind of power rank the other players that were important. And, the third player to the eighth player, there wasn't really a big difference here. They're top heavy, right? You got Tatum and Brown, who are emerging superstars. Kemba, when healthy and engaged, is really good. Marcus Smart's that glue guy. Robert Williams, when he's out there, he's effective. And then after that, it's
so your starters.
What? Your starters are good. And then the rest of the guys, Tristan Thompson is good some nights, not so good other nights. Pritchard is up and down. So you really don't have that consistent production from the bench, which
you have
most
nobody
teams
reliable
have
on the bench.
No,
They're hoping it's Fournier.
You're hoping it's Fournier, who's played, 4 games in 1 month? I think he's missed more games since he's come to Boston than Michael Jordan missed in his first 10 years with the Bulls. I mean, I'm not being hyperbolic there.
It's frustrating to make an acquisition like that, and then the guy just doesn't play because of health and safety protocols.
Now, when it comes to COVID, I don't want to knock anybody, but I also want to say they're not saying he's tested positive. He keeps
I don't think he has COVID.
Because he's in the wrong place at the wrong time, kind of the way Tristan Thompson was for a month. Like, you're a professional athlete. Can you just go along for another month or two, or however long the season's going to last, and not try to, explore the city of Boston, which, during a pandemic is not exactly the most exciting place to be for a young guy. So, just kind of be buttoned up and be serious about this. We've seen the mature players in the NBA haven't gone through this, right? Like, we don't see... it's kind of interesting. LeBron James hasn't been in the protocol, or Chris Paul, or any of those guys, but it's kind of the younger guys or the guys that aren't responsible that seem to be involved in this. And maybe it's just a case of, the adults act like adults. And here's Evan Fournier, maybe he doesn't believe that the virus exists. I don't know. But, it should make himself available more than 4 games in nearly a month.
Yeah, and so going back to Jabari Parker, Sep, that's exactly why they brought him in, because they do have to throw something against the wall because the bench is so bad. And I do look at him despite the fact that he's barely played in his NBA career, Sep, I look at him as an upgrade over some of those. I trust him more on the court than Ogilvy or Tremont Waters, or, as you mentioned, Grant Williams, because I just don't know what Grant Williams does that's a positive out on the court. So why not? They're bringing him in with zero risk. The bench is already terrible. You're not paying him anything. And he's a guy who at least has a skill that he can score. He did average 20 points a game one year. Granted, he only played 50 games that season. I think that it's an upgrade. Now, is it an upgrade that's going to make a lick of difference in the playoffs? Probably not, but it's still an upgrade. I do think that Brad Stevens is the perfect type of coach for a reclamation project like this. He did it with Evan Turner, who was at a better point in his career when he came to the Celtics than Jabari Parker is right now. But he turned Evan Turner into a viable player who got a massive contract from the Blazers after he left the Celtics. He turned Jordan, I'm forgetting the guy's
Jordan
name.
Clarkson?
No, not Jordan Clarkson.
No,
he's
not
good.
Jordan Clarkson. Yeah, Jordan Clarkson's still playing, actually.
That's who I was thinking. I'm forgetting what his name is. Whatever.
Yeah, you're starting to get the same thing I have, which is old age, which sometimes you just zone out at some point. But yeah, but in terms of Jabari Parker,
Jordan Crawford,
at least
it came to me.
Jordan Crawford. There you go.
He turned him into a viable player too.
So he's good at these reclamation projects, and Turner was the second overall pick, like Jabari Parker. And yeah, I mean, at least there's some talent there. We know Grant Williams doesn't have any, so at least there may be 3 games between now and the end of the regular season where he helps you win a game, maybe, God forbid. So yeah, it's worth exploring that.
He's put up 11 in his first game. He put up 8 in the second game. I mean, it's that's at least something. The bench, you're lucky to get 11 points from the entire bench on some nights. So I look at it as a no risk and potential mid-level reward sort of thing, where he's a rotation player. Listen, he's never going to amount to the hype that came in with being the number 2 overall pick in that draft and being the Duke star and being the guy who was talked about as a junior in high school. He's just never going to be that guy. Injuries have taken that away from him. His lack of defense has taken that away from him. The game's sort of grown past him being a mid-range player. I mean, he doesn't really have a three-point shot. Maybe he develops that more with the Celtics, but he's a career 32% three-point shooter. He's averaged under one attempt a game for his career, so he's not a three-point shooter. And in the NBA, as we talked about the other day with Steph Curry, you need to have a three-point shot in the NBA now. Everybody on the court, even centers, are expected to have it. So that's what's hurt him a lot. Injuries, the game started passing him by, and the no defense, and that's why he played 3 games for the Kings this year, and they waived him. That's why he was available, and it speaks to his shortcomings and the Celtics bench shortcomings as to why this is now a match that people are saying, hey, this could work out, because the Celtics bench is that bad. He's had no luck in the NBA, so maybe it works out. But if it works out, I wouldn't expect it to be a guy who's going to score 20 points a game. I expect it to be a guy who you can at least put in a rotation off the bench.
Beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Last night, the other night rather, on the Celtics broadcast app, because we're just going to stay Celtics-centric here, Mike Gorman, for whatever reason, was out. The Celtics' great play-by-play man, one of the great play-by-play men in the business. Filling in for him was Danny Ainge, who got switched to doing color, meaning Brian Scalabrine was the play-by-play guy. I don't know what was worse, losing to the Bulls without Zach LaVine or hearing Brian Scalabrine attempt to do play-by-play. It's not as simple as just saying what's happening on the court, doing play-by-play.
No, I mean, it kind of cheapens the guys that have really worked their asses off to do this, whether it be obviously Sean Grande, who was phenomenal on radio, because I can't think of a tougher sport to do than basketball on radio, the way the NBA is played now, where it is played at such a fast pace. Sean Grande's outstanding. Scalabrine, I don't find him entertaining, informative. I love Kendrick Perkins when Perk is part of the pregame show, halftime and postgame show. He's fantastic. Scalabrine kind of comes across as a guy who was a great player, which of course he wasn't, and he looks like Michael Rappaport, which is nothing to really, be proud of. Now, why
he won a championship, Sap? What do you mean?
Yes, he won a championship, right? He's got more championships than Barry Bonds had in baseball. Unbelievable. Maybe that's why Bonds isn't in the Hall of Fame, because Scalabrine has won more championship than him. Why couldn't have they done this? Like, I liked Ainge on the broadcast, because Ainge obviously has a personality when he lets it out there. Sometimes he's very guarded. It's not easy for the general manager of the team to do color commentary on the broadcast. That can't be easy, right? Because you picked all these players and you don't want to be critical of them. Could you picture Bill Belichick doing this, like during a preseason game? That would be kind of interesting, right? Just grunting about what the guy did or didn't do. No, of course he wouldn't. The NFL wouldn't, promote that. Basketball's different than any other sport. So I was happy with Ainge. Why didn't they just move Grande from the radio broadcast and have Wallach do the broadcast on the Sports Hub? So now you're giving 2 broadcasters an opportunity to, broadcast the game rather than a former player who, maybe would have been better served just doing studio that particular night, or having Ainge and Scalabrine with Grande, because we see that national games, sometimes they'll have multiple broadcasters. The best team in the business is who? Mike Breen, Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy. 3 guys work. Of course, they've built up chemistry over the years, and Scalabrine can't shut up, so I'm sure he would trample Danny Ainge, who more people want to hear what Ainge has to say than Scalabrine. But I don't know why they didn't do that, for whatever reason, because Grandy's done some games on NBC Sports Boston.
He did a game just a couple weeks ago because Mike Gorman was, not feeling well after the second COVID vaccine. So Grande did a game after Scal did the first one play-by-play. I thought that they'd learned their lesson, saying, okay, we need to bring in a guy who actually does this. Play-by-play is harder than color. Not saying color is not, valuable. It provides a lot to the game, but it's harder to do play-by-play. It's you can't just say, oh, you've done color commentary on this game, we can just move you to play-by-play. No. The opposite is a lot easier to do than that. Play-by-play is a lot harder. And when it's bad, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And it was bad last night. I mean, it was an unfair ask for Scal to do it because he has no training in doing it. It's completely different than color commentary. And it was an unreasonable ask for Celtics fans to have to try to listen to it for, the duration of an NBA regulation basketball game.
And the officials,
thank God it didn't go into overtime.
I mean, can we just get over that NBA officials aren't great, like on both sides, right? It's not like they came in to TD Garden with some wild conspiracy to see the Celtics lose to the Chicago Bulls of all teams. I mean, it's a tough sport to officiate. They're not necessarily great at it. Complaining about officials in the NBA is like complaining about your trip to the RMV. It's not going to go easily. It's not going to be pleasant, but you have to do it. Like Scalabrine's constantly talking about the officials. I think he wants to be Tommy Heinsohn, but you know what? Tommy Heinsohn was a great player. He was Mr. Celtic. Brian Scalabrine was a 11th guy on one championship team, and he's made a cottage industry out of that. So I would have preferred to see that. But I thought Ainge did the best he could, because you can't really say much when you're the general manager, because he used to be good on TNT.
Yeah, no, he's done
before
this
he
before.
got here. He's good at it. I think he loves basketball. He's a basketball junkie. And when he lets it out there, he does have a personality.
Yeah, I mean, Ainge was a player for obviously a long time, and a coach, so he's used to doing, press conferences and dealing with the media. He's always been good with the media in Boston. And yeah, TNT, I mean, that's the height of doing basketball commentary, is doing it on TNT or ESPN. And he did it. And so I wasn't surprised that Ainge was able to do the color commentary without issue, because he has an insight to the game. But the play-by-play is just, I mean, if you're saying Jaylen Brown dribbles, passes to Jason Tatum, Tatum dribbles, drives to the basket, he shoots off the rim. Like, that's you have to paint a picture with words, and that is not painting a picture with words.
No,
that's
and you
brutal.
can
you might as well watch. You might as well just read the play-by-play on the computer.
Yeah, and it's your job is to make the analyst shine. That's the thing.
Yes, that's a great point.
That's exactly what you're supposed to do. It's like a host of a radio show. In theory, you're supposed to make your co-host shine. You have to be giving. So I think that's what the play-by-play guy has to do. That's why I think Sean McDonough is one of the best. I think Joe Buck is great. Al Michaels is the gold standard. I mean, the man can do any sport. Even in his mid-70s, he's still outstanding. You make the analyst shine. Scalabrine doesn't understand that, because he's not trained to do it. And it's not fair to criticize him. And I did criticize him. But yeah, maybe they would have just been better off having Grandy step down to do NBC Sports Boston, and have John Wallach do play-by-play. He does a nice job on the Sports Hub. I mean, it's a difficult job. Well, that is a tough job. That has got to be the toughest play-by-play position
it's
now. It's even more difficult than hockey. I mean, hockey, I did one hockey game, and that was the end of it. After one hockey game, I said, I'm never doing that again. I used to love doing play-by-play. Basketball. I did, Tufts Jumbos. We did some BU basketball, a lot of high school basketball. I always thought it was the most fun to do. Football was also great. Baseball was good as well. But hockey is very difficult to do. I think Wallach tries his best. And again, I can't really even think about how difficult it is to do that with Cedric Maxwell, who, is to talk about someone who's outside the box, and Cedric Maxwell. Half the time I'm not sure what he's talking about, but he's entertaining. So yeah, it is what it is. It would have been better if the Celtics won the game, but they didn't win, and we had to sit through all of that.
Yeah, the Celtics fans have been lucky to have two of the best play-by-play people do Celtics games. For a while, Sean Grandy is, if not the best, one of the best on radio. Same for Mike Gorman on the television side of it. I know the plan is for Grandy to eventually take over for Gorman